The house on Willow Creek Road. It was the first week of October when Daniel and Claire Whitmore left the bustle of Boston behind and drove north, following the twisting roads that led deep into rural Maine. The sky was a pale gray, and a mist hung over the trees as they turned onto a narrow lane marked by a rusted sign, Willow Creek Road. The farmhouse appeared at the top of a hill, its white paint long peeled away, leaving behind weathered boards and a sagging porch that groaned at the slightest breeze. It had been empty for 40 years, the realtor had said, since the last owner, a woman named Margaret Leary, disappeared one winter night without a trace. For Daniel and Claire, the price was too good to pass up. They both laughed when the realtor nervously mentioned the town's stories about strange lights in the upper windows and the sound of footsteps in the fields at night. Old houses make old noises, Daniel had said, brushing it off. Claire had smiled, though her fingers had tightened slightly around the key as she turned it in the lock. The air inside smelled faintly of dust and something older, like wet earth sealed too long. Every room seemed to hum with quiet memory. In the kitchen, an ancient wood stove still stood, cold and rusted. Upstairs, they found a child's room, untouched except for a small rocking horse that creaked once when they entered, though no wind stirred. That first night, they drank wine on the porch, laughing about how they would restore everything, tear down the old barn, repaint the walls, make this place theirs. When the wind began to rise, they went inside, the boards shifting softly under their feet. Claire paused halfway up the stairs. "Dan," she whispered, "do you hear that?" From somewhere deep within the house came a slow, rhythmic thumping, like something heavy swinging against the wall. Daniel frowned, listening. "Probably just a loose shutter," he said, but when he opened the front door, the night outside was still. Later, as they lay in bed, Claire thought she heard a voice, soft, like a woman humming through the walls. She sat up, her heart thudding, but Daniel was already asleep. The next morning, they found muddy footprints leading from the back door to the base of the stairs. Only one set. When Daniel checked the door, the latch was still bolted from the inside. Daniel wiped the dried mud from the wooden floor, his expression puzzled. The morning air around the farmhouse felt heavier than usual, thick with the scent of rain and damp wood. Sunlight filtered weakly through the dusty windows, illuminating the faint trail of footprints that ended halfway up the staircase. Claire stood there, staring at them in silence. "I'm sure you made those last night," Daniel said, trying to sound casual, though his voice wavered slightly. Claire shook her head. "I didn't leave the room, Dan. I barely slept." They exchanged a long, uneasy glance. The house creaked softly, as though it were listening. Daniel sighed and rubbed his palms against his jeans. "Maybe an animal got in. We should check the doors and windows." That day, they decided to start cleaning room by room. In the living room, they discovered a stack of moldy books in a corner cabinet. One of them, a small leather-bound journal, was still legible. Claire brushed off the dust and opened it carefully. 1979, she whispered. Margaret Leary's diary. The entries were simple at first. Notes about the weather, about tending the fields behind the house, about her husband George traveling to town to sell produce. But in the last pages, the handwriting grew uneven. The sound came again from the well. "I heard a child crying. George says it's only my imagination, but I know he hears it too." Claire looked up. "We have a well, don't we?" Daniel nodded. "Behind the house, near the barn. I saw it yesterday." That afternoon, they went out back. The wind carried the earthy scent of wet leaves and moss. Half buried in the grass, they found the old well covered by a rotting wooden lid. Daniel lifted it carefully. A cold breath rose from the darkness below. "It's deep," he muttered, shining a small flashlight down the shaft. The beam vanished after a few meters, swallowed by blackness. Claire leaned closer, listening. For a moment, there was nothing but wind. Then, just as Daniel turned away, she froze. Dan, wait. It was faint, a whisper, almost like a child calling from deep underground. Claire bent nearer to the opening, but Daniel grabbed her arm quickly. Echo, he said sharply. Old wells do that. But there was something nervous in his voice, something that didn't sound convinced. That night, rain began to fall. The roof leaked in several places. Claire couldn't sleep. Above the ceiling, she heard movement, soft, deliberate footsteps pacing across the attic, stopping directly above their bed. She sat up, her pulse racing. Daniel mumbled, half asleep, "It's just rats, Claire. Old houses have rats." But the sound was too heavy for that. Something round rolled across the floorboards, bumping once before going still. When she finally gathered the courage to climb out of bed and listen, silence pressed down on her like a weight. The next morning, Daniel pulled down the attic ladder. Dust swirled in the light as he climbed up with a flashlight. The beam cut through years of cobwebs and neglect until it landed on a large wooden chest in the middle of the floor, locked with a rusted padlock. "This looks ancient," he said. Claire stood below, gripping the ladder. "What's inside?" "No idea. We'll need tools to open it." They decided to wait until afternoon, but curiosity gnawed at Claire. When Daniel drove into town to buy supplies, she went up alone. The air in the attic was colder, carrying the metallic smell of rust. She knelt beside the chest and brushed her fingers across the lock, surprised to find it already loose. She lifted the lid slowly. Inside were a child's clothes, stiff with age, a porcelain doll with one eye missing, and a small notebook written in the same hand as the diary downstairs. He stopped crying today. George lowered him into the well. There was no other choice, one entry read. Claire's breath caught. She slammed the notebook shut and stared up at the tiny roof window where a faint light bled in. That's when she heard it. Soft footsteps climbing the ladder below her. 3 steps, a pause, then 3 more. "Dan?" she called, her voice trembling. No answer. She descended carefully. But as soon as her feet touched the bedroom floor, the attic ladder snapped shut behind her with a sharp thud, as though pulled by invisible hands. Claire screamed and ran. When Daniel returned hours later, he found her sitting motionless in the living room, the notebook in her lap, her eyes distant. She didn't respond when he spoke, just stared toward the dark window. That night, she finally whispered, "He's still here, Dan." The child, Margaret, wrote everything. They never found his body. Daniel tried to reason with her, but even he felt the air had changed. Doors opened on their own. The rocking chair in the empty nursery moved in slow rhythm. In the bathroom mirror, Claire swore she saw a small figure behind her, featureless, watching. By the 3rd night, they'd had enough. Claire packed hurriedly while Daniel tried to start the car. The engine sputtered but wouldn't catch, though the tank was full. Claire stood on the porch, staring toward the well half hidden in fog. The forest whispered, faint but deliberate, like leaves imitating human speech. Just before dusk, there came 3 knocks at the back of the house, measured, patient. Daniel grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside. Claire waited, eyes on the clock. 5 minutes passed. 10. Then the sound of footsteps stopped altogether. When the door finally creaked open, Daniel stood there drenched, his face pale. "The water in the well rose," he said in a thin voice. "But it isn't just water. It's black. And I think something's moving down there." They didn't sleep that night. Claire sat on the bed, knees pulled to her chest, while Daniel stared at the window. From outside came a faint melody, like a child humming a lullaby with no words. It grew clearer, closer, until it seemed to drift just beyond the walls. Then came the knocking, soft, rhythmic from the front door. "Don't open it," Daniel whispered. But Claire was already standing, drawn forward as if by a voice only she could hear. She crossed the room slowly, each step echoing in the quiet. The knocking stopped the instant her hand touched the handle. When she opened the door, there was only fog, thick, swirling fog that smelled faintly of earth and salt. And in the middle of it, a small silhouette stood perfectly still, one tiny hand reaching out toward her. Daniel ran after her, shouting her name, but Claire had already stepped into the mist. The door shut softly behind them. By morning, the house was silent again. The car still sat in the drive. The front door hung open just enough for the wind to move it. On the kitchen table, 2 coffee cups waited, still warm. Out back, the old well was sealed with a new wooden cover, as though someone had recently repaired it. Locals who pass by at night say they see a faint light moving in the upstairs window, a lantern glow drifting from room to room. And if you stand near the garden, by the edge of the woods, and listen closely to the ground, you might still hear it. A child's whisper rising faintly from below, calling out through the darkness that never truly sleeps. Weeks passed after that morning, though in the quiet isolation of Willow Creek Road, time no longer seemed to move the same way. The townspeople said the Whitmores must have left during the night. No one went up to the old farmhouse to check. People in that part of Maine had learned, generations ago, that some places were better left alone. But on the 4th week, a man named Peter Hale drove up the hill in his pickup truck. He worked for the county, assigned to survey abandoned properties for redevelopment. The air that day was cold and dry, the trees stripped bare, their branches like dark veins against the gray sky. The house stood silent at the top, its windows reflecting nothing. When Peter stepped out of his truck, the sound of gravel underfoot echoed too loud. The wind had died completely. He looked around, uneasy, then approached the porch. The front door was slightly ajar, creaking gently in the motionless air. "County inspection," he called out, more for his own comfort than any real reason. His voice died quickly, swallowed by the house. Inside, everything was still. The scent of mildew and old wood lingered thick in the air. Dust covered every surface except for the 2 coffee cups on the kitchen table. Peter frowned. They looked recent, the faint brown rings of liquid still fresh. He touched one of the cups. It was cold now, but the porcelain felt wrong somehow, as if it retained a warmth that hadn't come from any human hand. He noted it in his logbook, then made his way upstairs. The floorboards groaned under his boots. The hallway stretched longer than it should have, walls closing in on both sides. At the far end, a child's room waited, the one Daniel and Claire had found untouched. The rocking horse was still there, facing the window. The doll, with its missing eye, sat on the sill, head tilted slightly as though it had turned to look at him. Peter stepped closer, flashlight shaking a little. He wasn't the kind of man to scare easily, but the silence here pressed too heavy on his chest. He glanced at the small bookshelf beside the bed and noticed the edge of a leather-bound notebook poking out. He reached for it, flipping it open. Inside were lines written in hurried, almost frantic handwriting. October 22nd. The water keeps rising. I can hear him calling again. He wants his mother. He wants someone to come. Peter turned the page. November 3rd. The house won't let me leave. He stopped reading. The floor beneath him gave a slow, protesting creak. He turned, expecting to see the door swaying open, but it remained perfectly still. Then from downstairs, something knocked 3 times. He called out, "Hello, anyone there?" No reply, only the low hum of the wind starting to rise again. Peter walked down carefully. The knocking came once more, softer this time, like knuckles against wet wood. He followed it through the back hallway, past the pantry, to the old cellar door. The air, there was colder, sharp with the smell of soil and rot. He hesitated, his flashlight beam trembling against the dark wood. When he pulled the door open, a damp gust rushed out, carrying a faint sound, a child's sob. His throat went dry. He aimed the light down the narrow stairs. The beam reached the packed dirt floor below, and in that thin circle of light, he saw footprints. Small ones, bare, leading from the corner of the cellar to the back wall, where stones had crumbled to reveal a narrow tunnel. Jesus Christ, he muttered under his breath. He took a single step down. The sobbing stopped instantly. Silence again, thick and absolute. Then, somewhere inside the wall, something moved, a scraping sound like fingernails dragging along stone. He backed away quickly, slamming the door shut and locking it, his pulse hammering in his ears. Outside, the clouds were rolling fast, pulling the day into an early dusk. He walked back to his truck, eager to leave, when he noticed something strange. The ground around the old well was wet, though it hadn't rained in days. Water had seeped through the earth, black and glistening, reflecting the dull sky. He stepped closer, drawn by a mix of fear and curiosity. The wooden lid looked newer than the rest of the property. Fresh nails, recently cut boards. He crouched and touched it. It was cold, colder than ice. As he leaned forward, the faint sound returned, the crying again, soft and rhythmic, rising from beneath the wood. Peter stood up fast, stumbling back. He hurried to his truck, climbed in, and turned the key. The engine started, but for a moment, the radio flickered on by itself, even though it had been off when he arrived. Through the static, a child's voice whispered one word. Stay. He floored the gas pedal and drove off, the tires throwing mud behind him. That night, he couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the well, the tiny hand reaching out through the fog. He tried to tell himself it was exhaustion, imagination, nerves. But when he went to wash his face in the bathroom mirror, he froze. In the reflection behind him, just for a second, he saw a pale figure of a woman standing by the shower curtain, eyes black and hollow, her mouth moving silently. He turned around. Nothing there. The next morning, Peter went to the sheriff's office. He reported the house unsafe, requested it be sealed off. The sheriff, an older man named Lowell, listened quietly, tapping a pencil on his desk. You're not the first to come in here talking about that place, Lowell said after a while. A family bought it last month. Young couple. They didn't last more than a week. Peter's face went pale. What happened to them? Lowell shrugged, but his eyes shifted toward the window. No one knows. Their car's still there. Locals say they see lights in the upstairs window at night. Same as always. Peter asked if anyone had checked. Lowell's answer was simple. No one goes up Willow Creek Road after dark. 2 nights later, against his better judgment, Peter found himself driving that same road again. Maybe he wanted to prove it was all just in his head. Maybe the pull of the house was something deeper. The closer he got, the thicker the fog became, rolling across the road like smoke. The farmhouse appeared suddenly through the mist, its windows faintly glowing with light. Not bright, but soft, like lanterns burning inside. He parked, heart pounding, and stepped out. The night was so quiet that he could hear his own breath. The door was open again, just a crack. From inside came a faint hum, a woman's voice singing a slow lullaby. He called out, hello. The song stopped. He took 1 step forward, then another. The air inside was warm this time, unnaturally so. He could smell candle wax, faintly sweet. The 2 coffee cups were still on the table, but beside them now lay a photograph in a broken frame. It showed Daniel and Claire standing in front of the house, smiling. But behind them, half hidden in the doorway, was the blurred shape of a child, pale, featureless, but unmistakably real. Peter dropped the picture. It cracked against the floor. The humming started again, this time upstairs. Slow, deliberate footsteps followed, pacing back and forth. He whispered to himself, "Just rats. Just rats." The lights flickered, then went out completely. In the sudden dark, something small brushed against his leg. He froze. His flashlight clicked back on, beam trembling as he aimed it downward. There, by his boot, were muddy footprints, fresh, glistening, leading toward the stairs. He followed them with the light until they vanished at the base of the steps. And then, from above, came a voice. A child's voice. "Mommy." Peter ran. He bolted through the door into the fog, not daring to look back. He reached his truck, started it, and tore down the road. Behind him, in the rearview mirror, the lights of the house shimmered once, then went dark. The next morning, Sheriff Lowell found his truck idling at the edge of the woods, headlights still on. The driver's seat was empty. Muddy footprints led from the truck toward the trees, then disappeared halfway through the clearing. The farmhouse still stood on the hill, quiet and still, as though it had never been touched. Years later, the county finally condemned the property. They filled the well with concrete, tore down the barn, and posted a warning sign on the gate. No one moved in again, but sometimes, after sunset, hikers swear they hear the sound of a woman humming somewhere deep in the forest. Others say that if you walk too close to where the well once stood, the ground still feels hollow, as if something inside is still breathing, still waiting. And on certain nights, when the fog rolls low and the moon hides behind the clouds, the light in the upstairs window flickers to life again. Soft, patient, calling out to anyone foolish enough to listen. Those who've heard it say it sounds like a child whispering from beneath the floorboards of the earth, asking over and over in a trembling voice the same word. The following weeks in the old farmhouse on Willow Creek Road were unlike anything Michael and Claire had ever experienced. At first, they tried to convince themselves that everything strange around them had an explanation. The footsteps upstairs could be the wind shifting old floorboards, and the whispers they sometimes heard might be the pipes or the wind funneling through the chimney. But when the same faint melody, like a woman humming an old lullaby, began playing every night at exactly 2:13 a.m., Claire could no longer sleep peacefully. She started keeping a notebook beside the bed, writing down everything that happened. The noises, the smells of lavender that drifted in from nowhere, and the shadows that lingered in corners longer than they should. Michael wanted to laugh it off, but even he started to wake up sweating, sometimes with the feeling that someone had just been standing beside the bed. One evening, after another restless night, Claire suggested they explore the basement more thoroughly. The first time they'd gone down there, it had been only to check the fuse box, but now something about that space drew her attention. Armed with flashlights, they descended the narrow steps that creaked and groaned under their weight. The air smelled of wet earth and rust. At the far end of the basement, beneath a low arch of brick, they found a wooden door nailed shut with 3 long iron spikes. Someone had painted over the boards in a faded red color, and a hand-carved cross hung upside down above it. Claire's breath caught in her throat. She whispered, asking if they should open it. Michael hesitated. The logical part of him screamed to leave it alone, but curiosity, a deep, gnawing curiosity, won out. He went back upstairs, fetched a crowbar, and began prying the nails loose. The final spike came free with a groan that echoed through the basement. The smell that poured out from behind the door was foul, like rot, and something far worse, something old. Behind it was a small, dirt-floored room with stone walls. In the center sat a rocking chair, draped with what had once been a lace shawl. And there, beside it, was a child's wooden cradle. The air inside was colder than ice. Claire's flashlight flickered as she stepped inside. When the beam caught the cradle, she saw a dark stain across the bedding, old but unmistakably blood. A sudden gust slammed the door behind them. The flashlight went out. Claire screamed, and in the pitch-black silence, the sound of the cradle creaking began. Back and forth, back and forth. Michael shouted, fumbling for his phone to use its light, but before he could turn it on, a soft voice, a woman's voice, hummed the same lullaby they'd heard in the nights before. It came from somewhere near the chair. When he finally managed to get the light on, the chair was moving on its own. The shawl slid from the backrest and dropped to the floor. Michael pulled Claire toward the door, struggling to pry it open, and when they finally burst into the main basement, the air around them seemed to warm instantly. The smell vanished, but Claire swore that just before they escaped, she saw a figure sitting in the chair, an old woman with empty eyes and a twisted smile. They boarded the door back up that same night. For days, they didn't speak about what they'd seen. Claire spent her hours in silence, sitting by the window, staring at the fields outside. Michael buried himself in repairs and gardening, anything to keep busy. But the farmhouse seemed different now. It wasn't just creaking wood and old pipes. It was breathing. Things worsened on the 7th night after they opened the basement room. Michael woke to find Claire standing at the foot of the bed, her nightgown soaked with mud. When he asked her what she was doing, she didn't answer. She just stared past him and whispered, "She's still down there." He grabbed her shoulders, shaking her awake. Her eyes rolled, and she gasped as if she'd been pulled out of a nightmare. She had no memory of leaving the bed. The next morning, he found muddy footprints leading from the back door all the way down to the basement steps. Michael decided to leave the house for a few days, to get away and think. But when he started the truck, the engine wouldn't turn over. Claire suggested they call someone, but the phone lines were dead, and their cell reception had vanished since the storm that passed through 2 days earlier. That night, the lullaby came again. But this time, it wasn't from the basement. It was upstairs, in the hallway outside their bedroom. The tune was louder, clearer, and mixed with the faint sound of a baby crying. Michael forced himself to get up, holding a flashlight like a weapon. Claire begged him not to open the door, but he did. The hallway stretched empty, the sound echoing faintly toward the attic stairs. Each step creaked as he climbed. When he reached the attic, the door was already open. Dust floated in the beam of his flashlight. And there, in the far corner, he saw something he hadn't noticed before, a trunk. It looked antique, covered in cobwebs and leather straps that had nearly disintegrated with age. The crying sound seemed to come from inside it. He knelt, hesitated, and slowly lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped in yellowed linens, lay a set of old toys, a wooden horse, a doll with glass eyes, and a small, empty baby bottle. The crying stopped immediately. The silence that followed was suffocating. Then, behind him, the floor creaked. He spun around, expecting to see Claire. But what stood there wasn't his wife. It was the old woman again, the same one from the basement. Her gray hair hung in tangled strands, her hands stretched toward him. "Bring her back," she whispered, her voice like dry leaves. "You woke her. Bring her back to rest." Michael stumbled backward, tripping over the trunk. When he blinked, she was gone. The next morning, Claire found him still in the attic, pale and trembling. He refused to speak at first, only muttering about her baby and the rocking chair. Claire finally demanded to know the truth. So they drove into the nearest town, 20 miles away, to search for records about the farmhouse. The county clerk, an elderly man with glasses, looked startled when he saw the address. He told them the house had belonged to the Darlens, a family that vanished in 1984. According to reports, the mother, Agnes Darlen, lost her infant daughter to illness one winter night. Neighbors claimed they heard her singing lullabies for days afterward, refusing to accept the baby was gone. When they finally entered the house, Agnes was found in the basement, rocking an empty cradle. She died there, still holding the shawl that covered her shoulders. The farmhouse had been empty ever since. Michael and Claire drove home in silence. Claire's hands shook the whole way. They decided to leave the house the next morning. But that night, something drew Claire back to the basement. She woke around 2 o'clock, hearing the lullaby again, but this time it wasn't eerie. It was gentle, almost sorrowful. She followed the sound downstairs. The boards creaked softly beneath her feet. When she reached the basement, the air felt still, as if holding its breath. The nails they had used to seal the door had fallen out, one by one, lying in a perfect line across the floor. The door was open again. Inside, the cradle was rocking, slow and steady. On it lay the same shawl, freshly folded. Claire stepped closer, whispering that they were sorry, that they didn't mean to disturb anything. For a moment, everything stopped. The air turned heavy, pressing down on her chest. Then, from the cradle, came the faint cry of a baby, soft, weak, real. Claire froze, tears streaming down her face. She reached forward without thinking, brushing her hand over the air above the cradle. The sound faded. When Michael found her moments later, she was kneeling on the dirt, holding nothing. But she was smiling faintly, whispering, "She's at peace now." They left the next morning, driving away without looking back. Weeks later, the real estate agent who came to check the property called them in shock. The basement, she said, was completely empty. No cradle, no chair, not even a patch of dirt disturbed. Only a faint scent of lavender lingered in the air. And when she stepped outside to lock up, she swore she heard someone humming a lullaby, carried softly through the autumn wind that swept across Willow Creek Road. 3 months after Michael and Claire left the farmhouse on Willow Creek Road, the property stood empty again, its shutters flapping loosely in the coastal wind. The grass grew tall, hiding the cobblestone path that led to the porch, and the once white paint peeled away in long, curling strips. Locals whispered that it was cursed. Children dared each other to ride their bikes past it at night, but none stayed long enough to see the faint light that sometimes flickered in the upstairs window. The real estate agency couldn't sell it. Every potential buyer withdrew their offer after visiting the house, often complaining about sudden headaches, nausea, or the overwhelming smell of lavender that filled the air inside. Some said they heard a baby crying. Others refused to talk about what they saw. 6 months later, a woman named Evelyn Hawthorne arrived from Boston. She was a historian specializing in colonial architecture and had heard about the farmhouse through a preservation grant. She wasn't easily frightened by local tales and intended to document the building before deciding whether it should be restored. When she first stepped inside, she was struck by its beauty beneath the decay, the grand staircase, the ornate molding, and the faint traces of stenciled flowers on the dining room walls. She spent her first evening photographing the rooms, jotting notes in her leather-bound journal. The house was silent except for the rustle of the wind through broken panes. At sunset, she set up her sleeping bag in the living room, too tired to drive back to town. Around midnight, she awoke to the sound of soft humming. It was distant but unmistakable, a lullaby, faint and slow, rising from beneath the floorboards. Evelyn sat up, her heart pounding. She grabbed her flashlight and listened. The melody grew clearer, almost tender, and she realized it was coming from the direction of the basement. For a moment, she hesitated. Every instinct told her to stay where she was. But curiosity, the same dangerous pull that had led Michael to pry open that basement door, won again. The basement door creaked loudly when she opened it. The smell that drifted out wasn't decay this time, but lavender, heavy and sweet. She descended slowly, her beams sweeping across the stone walls. Everything looked undisturbed. The space where the sealed door had once been was now just bare brick, patched unevenly as if someone had filled it in long ago. Then her light caught something in the far corner, a rocking chair, old and splintered, facing the wall. Evelyn froze. She hadn't seen it earlier. It was impossible to miss during her initial inspection. She stepped closer, whispering to herself that it must have been moved by workers long before she arrived. But when she reached out, the chair began to rock on its own, slow and rhythmic. Her flashlight flickered, and in that flicker, she saw a figure sitting in it. A woman, gray-haired, her face half-hidden. Evelyn gasped and stumbled backward. The light steadied again, and the chair was empty. She fled upstairs, locking herself in the living room, trembling under the thin beam of her flashlight until dawn. When morning came, the house felt still again, as if nothing had happened. Evelyn told herself it had been exhaustion. She'd driven 5 hours, eaten little, and let her imagination get the better of her. She packed her equipment and went into town to gather historical records from the library. The librarian, an elderly woman named Ruth, froze when Evelyn mentioned the farmhouse on Willow Creek Road. "You shouldn't stay there," she said quietly. "People don't last long in that house." Evelyn smiled politely but pressed on, asking about the Darlin family. Ruth sighed and led her to the archives. There she found yellowed newspaper clippings detailing what had happened 40 years earlier. The disappearance of Agnes Darlin and her baby. The discovery of the rocking chair, the cradle, and a mother's body. But what caught Evelyn's attention most was an old photograph. Agnes, standing proudly on the porch, cradling a baby wrapped in lace. On the back, someone had written a date, October 12th, 1983. Evelyn frowned. It was the same day as her own birthday. She tried to laugh it off as coincidence, but an uneasy chill crept up her spine. That night, she returned to the farmhouse with a recorder and a camera. If there was something in that house, she wanted proof. She set the recorder in the living room and spoke softly into the microphone. "This is Evelyn Hawthorne, documentation log 1. I'm investigating the property formerly owned by the Darlin family. There have been local claims of unusual activity. I intend to verify them." She left the device running and walked upstairs. The floor groaned under her steps. In one of the bedrooms, she found old wallpaper peeling in long strips and a faded crib pushed against the wall. On its headboard was carved the name Lila. She ran her hand over the carved letters. Then, from downstairs, the recorder clicked. It was still recording, but a faint voice came through, humming the same lullaby she'd heard the night before. Her throat tightened. She rushed down the stairs. The recorder was where she left it, still rolling. But through the static, she could hear whispering, almost words. Evelyn played it back slowly, pressing the speaker to her ear. "Don't wake her." The voice was fragile, quivering, as though spoken by someone centuries old. That night, Evelyn didn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw flashes of the old woman's face from the basement. She dreamed of the cradle, the smell of lavender, and a child's cry that echoed through the hallways. By the third day, she decided she couldn't stay any longer. But before leaving, she wanted to document the basement one last time. She brought her camera, tripod, and a lantern. The moment she stepped down, the temperature dropped. Frost formed along the stone walls, though it was the middle of July. She set the lantern down and began filming. Her breath came out in small clouds. Then she noticed something she hadn't seen before. A small outline in the corner where the bricks met the floor, as if someone had recently dug and covered the ground again. She knelt, brushing away the loose dirt. Beneath it, her hand struck wood. Carefully, she cleared the area until a small wooden box appeared. It was sealed with rusted nails. She pried it open. Inside lay a lace shawl and a yellowed birth certificate. The ink almost faded. It read, Lila Agnes Darlan, born October 12th, 1983. Her heart pounded. The date matched the photograph. And her own. The lantern flickered. She heard the chair begin to creak behind her. Then soft footsteps descended the stairs, bare feet, slow and deliberate. She turned. At the bottom of the steps stood the old woman, her gray hair hanging down, her dress stained with time. Her eyes were black voids. In her arms, she held something swaddled in a cloth. Evelyn tried to move, but couldn't. The woman stepped closer. You came back, she whispered. You always come back. The words made no sense. Evelyn backed away, clutching the box. Who are you? She stammered. The old woman smiled faintly. My child, she said. And as she spoke, Evelyn saw the woman's face shift, just for a moment, into something familiar. Her own features, aged and hollow. The cradle behind them began to rock, though no one touched it. The smell of lavender filled the air. Then everything went black. When Evelyn awoke, it was daylight. She was lying on the basement floor, the box beside her. The shawl was gone. The house was silent again. She packed her things, got into her car, and drove away without looking back. Months later, her footage was discovered by her assistant after she failed to return from the project. The last minute of the video showed her face, pale and confused, whispering, She's here. She found me. After that, the camera fell and the image blurred into darkness. The farmhouse remains empty to this day. The county marked it unsafe, though no structural damage was ever found. Locals swear that if you drive past on a quiet night, you can still hear a woman singing softly to her baby. Her voice carried through the pine trees along Willow Creek Road. Some say it's Agnes Darlan, still waiting for her child. Others whisper that it's Evelyn, trapped in the house's memory, humming the same lullaby to a child she never had. But those who know the story best avoid that road entirely, especially when the wind smells faintly of lavender and the moonlight glows through the cracked windows of the farmhouse that refuses to die. A year passed since Evelyn Hawthorne's disappearance, and the house on Willow Creek Road had sunk deeper into silence. The county had boarded the windows, padlocked the doors, and posted a faded orange sign warning of unsafe conditions. Yet somehow, the padlocks never stayed shut for long. Locals often found them dangling loose, as though someone, or something, inside had gently unlatched them during the night. The nearby town of Millersfield had long learned to leave the property alone. The only visitors were thrill seekers, teenagers looking for a ghost story, amateur paranormal investigators with cheap equipment, and drifters who didn't believe in curses. Most stayed for an hour, some only a few minutes, but none of them were the same afterward. One autumn evening, when the fog rolled thick over the fields, a small van pulled up along the dirt road that led to the farmhouse. The headlights cut through the mist, illuminating the sagging porch. For people stepped out, members of a small podcast team known as Echoes of the Unknown. They'd driven up from Portland after hearing about the house and Evelyn's vanishing. Their leader, a calm and methodical man named Jared, set up the recording gear while his younger sister Leah began photographing the property. With them were Marcus, the sound engineer, and Heather, who handled the research. They weren't reckless. They'd investigated haunted places before, but something about the air around Willow Creek Road felt different. It was heavier, colder, as if the land itself was exhaling sorrow. Leah was the first to comment on the smell. Lavender, she said quietly. It's everywhere. They entered through a window, prying the boards just enough to squeeze in. The air inside was damp and stagnant. Dust motes floated through the beams of their flashlights. The living room still had the outline of Evelyn's old sleeping bag pressed into the floorboards, faint but visible beneath a thin layer of dirt. Jared began his introduction into the microphone. We're standing inside the Darland farmhouse, abandoned for over 40 years. Locals claim that those who enter either don't come out or come out changed. Tonight, we're hoping to find out why. Heather unpacked the notes she'd gathered. Agnes Darland, she read aloud, was a widowed mother who lived here in the early 80s. Her daughter, Lila, died of fever during a winter storm. Agnes refused to bury her, claiming the baby would wake soon. When the sheriff came, he found her dead in the basement. Some say she's still here, rocking the cradle. The team exchanged uneasy glances. Marcus tried to lighten the mood with a joke, but his voice echoed strangely, as if someone else repeated his words a heartbeat later. He frowned and tapped his recorder. Did you guys hear that? They replayed the audio. The echo was there, but distorted. After Marcus's voice faded, another whisper came through, almost a breath. Leave. Leah's face paled. It's probably feedback, Jared said quickly, though his tone betrayed doubt. They decided to set up for the night, running cables through the main rooms. Jared placed an EMF reader on the table. The small green light flickered erratically. Leah set a camera facing the staircase. By 2 a.m., they were exhausted. The house creaked softly as the wind brushed through the trees outside. Heather dozed off in her chair, while Marcus continued monitoring the audio levels. Then came the sound of humming. Soft, almost motherly, it drifted through the air, carrying the faintest tune. It came from somewhere upstairs. Leah looked up, whispering, "Do you hear that?" Jared nodded, switching on his recorder. "It's the lullaby," he said quietly. The same one from Evelyn's tapes. They followed the sound up the staircase. Each step groaned under their weight. At the top, the hallway stretched into darkness. The humming grew louder, coming from the last door on the right, the nursery. When Jared opened the door, a chill swept through them. The crib was there, covered in dust, with the name Lila still carved into its headboard. Beside it stood a rocking chair, moving slowly on its own. Leah lifted her camera and took a picture. The flash illuminated something for just a second. A figure sitting in the chair, head bowed, shawl draped over thin shoulders. But when they blinked, the chair was empty again. Marcus whispered, "I think we should go." Before anyone could move, the lullaby stopped. Silence fell heavy, pressing into their chests. Then from downstairs came the cry of a baby, sharp, piercing, real. Leah turned to run toward the stairs, but the door slammed shut behind them. The knob wouldn't budge. The baby's cry grew louder, echoing through the walls until it felt like it was coming from everywhere at once. Jared pounded on the door. "Open it," he shouted, but something on the other side began whispering. It wasn't a single voice. It was many, overlapping, rising in a desperate chant. Heather covered her ears, screaming, "Stop it! Please stop!" And then, just as suddenly as it began, everything went quiet. The door swung open on its own. The hallway was empty. They ran. Jared didn't stop until they were outside, panting in the cold night air. Leah dropped to her knees, sobbing. Marcus tried to comfort her, but his hands were shaking uncontrollably. When they reviewed the recordings the next morning, something strange appeared. In the background of the lullaby, just before the baby's cry, a woman's voice could be heard whispering, "Evelyn, come home." None of them had said that name. 2 weeks later, Jared returned alone. He told the others he needed to retrieve one of the cameras they'd left behind. But the truth was different. He'd been dreaming about the house every night. The same image haunted him. A woman sitting in a rocking chair, holding a baby, smiling at him as she hummed softly. He arrived just before dusk. The lavender scent met him at the door, stronger than before. He walked through the halls with the familiarity of someone who'd lived there years ago. The air seemed to pulse with quiet life. When he reached the nursery, he found the camera still on the floor, battery long dead. The crib was gone. Only the chair remained. He sat down, his breath visible in the cold air. The house was silent until he spoke. "Evelyn," he said softly, "are you here?" No answer, only the faint creak of the chair beneath him. Then, from the corner of the room, a figure stepped forward. It was a woman, young and pale, her eyes hollow with exhaustion. He recognized her instantly from the photographs. Evelyn Hawthorne. "You shouldn't have come," she said, her voice trembling. Jared's throat went dry. "You disappeared. Everyone thought. They'll think the same of you," she interrupted. "Once she finds you." He stood, backing away. Ooh, the air grew colder. Behind her, the shadows twisted into shape. The outline of another woman, older, her gray hair drifting like smoke. She smiled faintly. "My daughter," she whispered. "She needs a mother." Evelyn screamed, "Run!" But Jared couldn't move. The world seemed to fold inward, his limbs heavy, his vision dimming. He heard the creak of the chair again and the faint cry of an infant. Then everything went black. Days later, Leah came looking for him. The van was still parked outside, empty. She called for him until her voice broke, but no answer came. When she finally went inside, the house was silent except for the steady rhythm of the rocking chair. On the seat lay Jared's recorder. She pressed play. The tape hissed, then began to play the same lullaby. Halfway through, Jared's voice came, distant and hollow. "She's here. The baby's awake." Then the sound of a woman humming, followed by silence. Leah ran out of the house, vowing never to return. Today, the farmhouse on Willow Creek Road stands half hidden behind overgrown trees. The boards still hang loose, the windows clouded with dust. On quiet nights, when the fog rolls in from the marsh, travelers claim they see a light flickering in the nursery window. Some say it's a lantern. Others swear it's the glow of a rocking chair swaying back and forth. And if you stop on the roadside long enough, the air will fill with the faint scent of lavender. A soft lullaby will drift through the wind. No one has entered the house since. Yet the locals say it no longer feels empty. Sometimes, a woman's silhouette can be seen on the porch, cradling something in her arms, humming gently to calm a child that has never stopped crying. Those who listen long enough hear another sound too. The faint echo of footsteps from within, pacing softly, as if someone new has joined them. Someone who, like all before, came seeking truth and instead found a home they can never leave. Years passed, and the story of the house on Willow Creek Road became part of Maine's folklore. Travelers avoided the narrow, winding road that led to the property, especially when the fog crept low over the fields. The farmhouse itself began to sink into the earth, its walls bowing inward, its roof half collapsed under the weight of countless winters. Nature tried to reclaim it, but somehow the house refused to die completely. People still whispered about it in the diners and small bars of Miller's Field. Some swore they saw candlelight flickering behind the broken windows, or a woman's shadow moving gently through the upstairs hallway. Others claimed to hear the lullaby when the wind was just right, carrying the haunting tune across the fields like a memory that refused to fade. A few brave souls ventured there, thinking they could capture proof of the supernatural. None succeeded. Their recordings always ended the same way, with static followed by that faint, unmistakable humming. Over time, the story of Agnes Darlin, her lost child Lila, and the vanished Evelyn Hawthorne became tangled together until no one could tell where one ended and the other began. Some said Evelyn had become part of the house itself, forever rocking the cradle beside Agnes. Others believed the house had taken more than one life since. The spirits of the curious, the lost, and the stubborn, all bound to its walls by the lullaby that called them home. Now, locals say that on certain nights, especially in October when the air turns sharp and the leaves burn red, you can still see the faint glow of a lantern in the window. If you listen closely, past the rustle of the trees, you'll hear it. A woman's voice, soft and sorrowful, singing to a baby that never grows, never sleeps, and never stops crying. And if you're unlucky enough to step too close to the porch, the lavender-scented wind might shift just enough for another sound to reach your ear. A whisper, almost kind, almost welcoming. It will say your name. Then the door will creak open, and the house on Willow Creek Road will have one more story to tell.